probably did the same thing, although neither of them may have thought that that's what they were doing. The thing about these extreme forms, I mean, people, I suppose, might feel that something in their life, their sort of psychology is being betrayed by the authorities, and they therefore have a tendency to resort to versions of their faith which seem to take them back to something and revive elements that they are missing, if you like, that are falling short in their lives. I mean, I think one of the movements in Judaism, which I don't know how far back it goes now, it's modern enough, called Lubavitch, has had I had a program about this once. It had a great effect on some of the people in sort of London that they featured in this program, who were visited by kind of proselytizers for this form of, I don't know what you'd call it, not a sect, it's something else than a sect. But anyway, the point was that it was quite obvious that they were quite fascinated by the insistence of the Lubavitch people on observing the rituals and sort of marking your identity in that sort of way. Without saying that the rituals were the point, they were saying that they were valuable. I think that was what I seemed to get out of it. You know, all this stuff about when you light candles and all this sort of stuff. I think people kind of flee to that, or kind of strain after it, when they think that their conventional authorities are letting them down in some way or not coming up to the mark. That may be part of it. I wouldn't want to say any more than that.
Simon, and then please.
Yeah, I don't know if you've really covered this, but Sandy, would you go along with the argument that religion is sort of like past relations of production, if you will, or do you think it's a separate development? How can I put this? That religion is something that humans have invented separate to their economic lives, as sort of, if you like, part-time.
I don't think it's separate exactly. I think it's a different issue in some ways, but like other things, the context in which it comes. I mean, the development of early human society must have affected this. The things that began to interest them because of developments. I mean, once again, we're in sort of slightly tricky territory here. But I suppose when human beings first emerged as a species, okay, all humans have the capacity to think symbolically, but maybe they didn't do too much symbolic thinking for a while. You know, maybe that was a skill that had to be developed down generations, and it was only when a sort of whole cultural heritage, if you like, of art and contemplation and what have you, and language indeed, because there are references in the McCabe book to languages which are so rudimentary that much of what the people say at one level has to be assisted by gesture, so that communication becomes very difficult in the dark. I don't know, I'd want to investigate that a bit further myself, but assuming there's any truth in that, you know, we kind of assume, we think of language and we think of symbolic thought and what have you as, in a sense, given for all human beings. Well, okay, we all have the capacity for it, but maybe it had to develop as a practical reality, just like other things had to develop. And maybe religion comes about as part and parcel of that in changing economic circumstances. And there might be something in the view about past relations of production. You know, it's a kind of nostalgia, almost, or a kind of falling back on tradition. There might be something in that view.
Vince?
I think this question that we touched on earlier on in the meeting on compartmentalising religion and other related and other subjects is a very important one. And two examples I can think of from what I've been looking at recently. One is the Thought for the Day programme on Radio 4. I'm sure quite a lot of people here tonight are familiar with the debates and controversy that has been going on in that programme for years about why religious people are given the overwhelming say day after day in that programme. But not just that. The fact is, as we know, people like John Humphreys and other interviewers on that programme are very tough in their analysis and in their confrontations with politicians and other people in the news. They will, as we know, they will challenge those beliefs in what these politicians say in a far more confrontational way than would have been the case perhaps when Jack DiManio was on the Today programme back in the 60s. And yet, a few minutes later, after all these analytical interviews and confrontation with politicians, suddenly the intellectual analysis will disappear as we get the Bishop of Oxford or some rabbi on, and he will be allowed to tell us what he knows, what God is thinking. He knows what the Christian or the Jewish God, what their reaction is towards such and such a political event or such and such a piece of human behaviour. Now, how can all this be allowed to go unchallenged? And it seems to be the compartmentalising, the psychology of compartmentalising thing. How can people suddenly become intellectual analysts, and then suddenly they turn it off for 5 minutes and turn it back on again? And another example, one of my best friend is a Methodist, and he's got an MA in maths. He's been interested in science all of his life, and yet he can still be a Christian. I've asked him, how can he accept the importance of the empirical investigation in science, and then when we come across religion, just accept it? And all he could really say, and I'm sure we've all heard this many times before, is that it's just his faith, it's just his belief. Now, I think it would be interesting to hear what other people have to say about that, including Sandy, of course, or how people can turn their brains on, turn them off, and back on again.
Maybe they'll just have no rest for 5 minutes. That's a good way to think of it.
I think it was. Did you have your hand up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sandy, I'd appreciate it if you could name some of the primitive tribes or societies who you talked about earlier, who existed, or perhaps exist, without any form of religion. And given that religion has been described as our first attempt at science, explaining things that we couldn't understand, the rising and setting of the sun, thunder and lightning and so on. What was the general perspective on such matters of these tribes? Were they just disinterested? And finally, on the topic of science and religion, wouldn't it be best to bear Marx's favourite motto, doubt everything, in mind? Because science too can be